Good evening and good afternoon. Let's see, Good morning to some of you, and good evening to the rest of us. Tonight's learning will be the Ilui Nishmat, like it needs an Ilui Nishama, of the Arizal, who just before we went live, I was talking with Danny that noted that the Arizal accomplished an incredible amount of things in his life and passed away at the young age of 36. And now, again, as Danny had noted, um, first of all, like all of our neshamot, we talk about this, don't really want to be here in the first place. Kal v'chomer, something is as holy as the Arizal, um, for sure. So probably was very special for him to be wherever he is. So the neshama should have an aliyah. Learning we do. In addition to that, mentioned very briefly something again before we went on with the recording, and I want to clarify something. Clarify that maybe just make a comment. This is the last class that we're going to have. No, Chas v'shalom. This is the last class we're going to have before Tisha B'Av, and we know that it says about Adar, the month of Purim. It says Mishanichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha. When you enter the month of Adar, that you're supposed to increase your joy. And it says regarding the month of Av, also known as Menachem Av, that Mishanichnas Av Mima'atin Besimcha. You're supposed to reduce your joy. But there's a common denominator there that everyone seems to miss. And that is whether you're reducing or you're adding, you still have to have joy. This is not a period where you walk around moping and crying and, oh my gosh, we don't have this and we don't have that. Yes, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. It's again, as I mentioned on my AACI talk the other night, and I've talked about it here in Malay Adumim, that it's up to you and me. It's not up to Hashem on this one. This is our job to make sure we have a Beit HaMikdash. But it says Ma'atin Besimcha means we reduce our joy. You still have to have a level of joy. There's no such thing as being Jewish and not having joy in your life, which will definitely play right into a topic that will span multiple chapters in Tanya down the road when we get there, Bezrat Hashem. Um, and there will be a couple of classes that may get delayed or canceled over the next month. As some of you on here know, I will be doing at least three, if not four book launches in the very near future. A couple of them may end up on a Tuesday night. If they do, we'll see if I can do an alternate night for our learning. We shall see. I'll let everybody know. In the meantime, from now on, unless there's a change, before class starts, just go on to the WhatsApp group and take a look at the link, because every time it's going to be a new link from now on. Just this way, I have the ability, and perfectly legitimate, to use my account from Misrad HaChinuch, from the education ministry, to have unlimited length of time on Zoom, as opposed to getting cut off. So that's the deal. That's my introduction. We also want to continue learning for a refuah shleima for all those who were in all the accidents, but specifically one in particular that I'm unfortunately very familiar with. There was an accident last week, which the mother says was an actual ramming attack, where the mother and three or four of her children were injured, and the 6-year-old boy was killed. This woman's sister is my daughter's best friend, so I know the family indirectly. And for those of you know Jim Kleinberg, see if he's on. No, this is a relative family relation to Jim Kleinberg as well, his family. So they should have a refuah shleima, both refuah Nephesh and refuah haguf. So let me tell you what I want to do tonight. I want to go to sleep. But besides that, before I go to sleep, I got it out for Mariv. Before Mariv, I'll teach a class. I want to give a little brief summary of Chapter 8. We're going to do that in two ways. One is going to be by reading a very brief comment from Rav Ginsburg. And one we're going to look at a 5-minute video of a very nice, concise wrap-up of Chapter 8 and good lead into Chapter 9. That's the first thing we're going to do. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to get into Chapter 9, Bezrat Hashem, and we are going to hit a milestone tonight. And I'll explain to you what that milestone is when we get to it. And then hopefully we'll see some insights into what this chapter really is coming up. One thing I besides loving Tanya altogether, what I really like is the building blocks that he uses, and also how he deconstructs so much of what we take for granted and we don't really take the time to think about. So let's take a look first at, let me share with sounds, I don't forget that. The first, no, you don't need to need that. You don't need to know that. You need to know this. There we go. You see in front of you now the PowerPoint or no? Just shake your head yes or no. You see a PowerPoint that says Halev, Yesh on it? Yes? Wait, take yourself, you see it. Okay, good. Okay. So the first thing here is, this is the introduction of Ginsburg to chapter 9, where he then refers back to chapter 8, what we just did. I'm going to read this, explain it, and then we're going to look at, like I said, this 5-minute brief introductory video. אחרי שבפרקים הקודמים הסביר רבינו הזקן את מהותה של הנפש הבהמית. After in the earlier chapters, when the Alter Rebbe, the Admor HaZaken, explained the essence of what the Nefesh HaBahamit was, and he did that at the end of Parak Aleph, we're going all the way back, Lumat Mahuta Nefesh Elokit, relative to or compared to the Nefesh Elokit, and these are terms we've used hundreds of times already, Nefesh HaBahamit, the animal soul, and the Nefesh Elokit, the godly soul, Shi Chelek Elokami Ma'al Mamash, which we learned in Parak Bed. At Eser Kochot HaNefesh Elokit, we also talked about the 10 levels of the various powers, as it were, of the godly soul. Hasechel HaMolidat HaMidot, how we learned how a person's intellect creates the midot, the character traits of the individual. That was Parak Gimel. He's giving a kind of a nice big summary here. You'll see why when we get into chapter 9. At Shloshet Lebusheha, we talked about the Lebushim. Remember, they were Machshava, Dibur, Maaseh, speech, thought, and action. Ha'itaron sheyesh b'kiyum haTorah v'mitzvot v'chashava, Dibur, Maaseh. We also discussed before, why is it Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, that Torah supersedes every other mitzvah. We also talked about that, how it becomes a part of your intellect. Umalat levush hamachshava v'yediyah v'ayim Torah uleumata, and on the other side of the coin, kochot levushei nefesh habahamit. What were the powers of the animalistic soul? What were the levushim, or the garments of the animalistic soul? Mahuta klipa. We discussed klipa in very detailed point. We talk about klipat noga, gimel klipot hatmeot. How by misusing our speech, thought, and machshava, dibur, and maaseh, our thought, speech, and action, can cause them to go down from a high level to a low level. That was prakim vav through chet. Now that we have learned to meet, to understand a little bit about the two different types of neshamot we have, remember the nefesh habahamit, the animalistic soul, and nefesh elokit, the godly soul. Not just outwardly, so to speak, in quotes, what it is and the outward appearance, as it were. We also delved internal as well. We've learned a lot about the nature of these two souls. Now it's possible we're going to now be introduced, he said, that now we know that there's a godly soul, an animal soul. We went very much into depth about both of those, of their anatomy, so to speak, the anatomy of the Nefesh HaBahamit, the anatomy of the Nefesh Elokit. And we learned about how things, what they affect, what they do, how they're driven. Now, he said, this upcoming chapter, we're going to learn about their physical, now I say physical, it's not really physical, it's their metaphysical location within the body, and also about the war that exists between the two. Now, that's a very nice leading sentence. We're going to come back to that, but I want to make sure something's clear before I continue. When we are going to talk in chapter 9 about placement within the body of something, if I ask you, where is your pancreas? Where is your liver? Where is your gallbladder? You can actually point to a spot and say, this is where it is, because it's something physical. When we're talking about nishamot, and he's going to talk about the placement and the physical location of the neshama, we've already talked about this concept about the neshama being in the blood. We've already talked about that. We're talking in a metaphysical sense, in a spiritual sense, not actual physics. Not physical. We're going to come back to it. But what I want to do I came across this individual. I watched a few of his very brief reviews of chapters, and I thought this one was actually quite good. I want to share it with you. Doesn't mean I'm going to do it with every chapter because I have my own reviews that I'd like to do, but I'd like to play this one for you. So let's just get this here. And tell me if you see, just shake your head yes or no. Do you see a YouTube video in front of you? Good. Okay, let's make it so you can hear it also. This is what he does. He has, I don't know, he must teach Tanya, obviously. And he has dozens and dozens of videos I've never seen till today of just 5-minute reviews of every chapter.
Back to Tanya in less than 5. The last 2 days we've been studying chapter 8. Having established in chapter 7 that something which God forbids in his Torah, then that action or that item remains in its ungodly, impure state. And things, actions, behaviors in this world that are permitted by Torah law, then it depends on me and my intention when I engage in those actions to either elevate it to a holy state, eating for the sake of nourishing myself so I can serve God, or my intention in the negative sense will make that item or that action descend into impurity. I'm engaging this for overindulgence or for lust. The Alter Rebbe in chapter 8 now adds one crucial element within this whole picture. And that is, every action, every word I speak, every thought I have, everything I eat, everything I engage in, all of that comes together to make the totality of me. My body is a conglomerate of everything I've ever eaten. My mind is a conglomerate of all the things I've studied, learned, and thought. My consciousness, my whole self, is a conglomerate of words I said, things I heard, actions and experiences I've engaged in. And as such, each of these actions, each of these words, each of these thoughts, and each of the food items that I've eaten, everything I've consumed, whether literally food or consumed in my mind, through my eyes, through my ears, all of these things leave their mark on me. If those things are holy, if the food I've eaten is with holy intention, if the behaviors were good and godly behaviors, then it leaves the godly mark on me. If, God forbid, the opposite, it leaves a negative mark on me. If I've eaten non-kosher food, God forbid, even if it wasn't on purpose, but that impure food is now part of me. And therefore, I must go through a cleansing process in life after death before my soul can ascend to return to be one with God. This, the Alter Rebbe explains, is what hell is in Jewish thought. It's not punitive, in which God is punishing you for bad things you've done. It's a cleansing process the body and soul has to go through to shed itself of all the negative experiences or all the ungodly experiences it's accumulated throughout its life. Whether it be food, thought, speech, some action, some behavior, some experience. If they're ungodly and unholy, then the soul and the body has to go through a cleansing process to shed itself of that negativity, of that ungodliness, before the soul can reunite with God in the life after death. And this leads the Alter Rebbe to one final, very crucial point. Because everything I consume, whether through my mouth, eating, or in my mind, some sort of content or idea that I consume, because it all becomes part of me. Therefore, when it comes to studying ideas, philosophies, sciences, math that are outside of the purview of Torah, one must be very cautious. Just as it is with food, as we explained in chapter 7, that I can eat food with the intention of being gluttonous, or I can eat food with the intention of nourishing myself so I can serve God. The same thing is true of consuming secular studies, non-Torah studies. I can do it with the intention of being able to learn better, because if I understand certain sciences, I'll understand certain parts of Jewish law better. I can study those sciences because I want to make a better living so that I can live better and therefore serve God better, in which case all of that study will have been elevated. Or I can study those secular studies with the intention of just me promoting myself, in which case the impurity that I have ingested is not just in the body as it would be with food, but goes to the mind. And it's a much more sensitive part of who I am. And therefore, when engaging in the study of secular studies, one must be extra cautious to make sure that the intention and motivation is correct, so that it doesn't have a negative impact on the very deepest part of who I am, my mind. The takeaway from all of this is, every time I consume anything, an action, a behavior, an experience, food, or an idea, I must be considerate of the fact that that action becomes part of who I am. And do I want that item to be part of who I am? See you and conclude chapter 9.
Okay, so I think that, I should close that.
Wow, he was good.
Yeah, I think so too.
What's your job, Rabbi?
But what is the, hold on one second. Hold on. I got a commercial playing in the background. I can't.
Levy knew. Wow, Rabbi knew. Very nice.
Where is this from? Oh, I bet you it's here. Oh, here. After it finished the video, it went into a commercial for Bardak. He's a comic. Okay, there we go. He's actually very funny. A Haredi guy who does all kinds of situational comedy for the Haredi world. It's hysterical, actually. Anyways, okay. So a couple comments on the last point he made there. Hopefully, yeah. So you're right. He's very clear and concise, and that's why I like what he said. I taught him everything he knows. Anyways, I want to comment on the last piece he said, because the Baal Tanya make comment at the very end of the chapter. If you remember, says, and this is why the Ramban and the Rambam, it's actually historically the opposite. The Rambam and the Ramban were able to learn physics and sciences and other math and other things, because they then used that to help apply to halacha. The example I gave had to do with the Rambam when it came to the section on not just Kiddush HaChodesh, but he talks about the movement of the constellations in the sky, that unless you're someone, for those of you who know Roy Hoffman, brilliant knowledge of astronomy, you're not going to understand, honestly, most of what he writes, no matter how smart you are, because you really have to understand a lot of technical astronomical information to understand what he's saying. You still learn it, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be absorbed in the same way as Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et. But his point being, in this whole chapter, we have to be careful what we ingest, both in a physical sense by food, both in a spiritual sense, through our eyes, through our ears, through our mind. And for those of you who remember the beginning of Masiyat Yesharim, whether you learned it with me now, you're learning it with me now, or you learned it on your own, he gives the example of having a glass of water. I'm changing it just a little bit. And he says that, put this one drop of poison in it. And I want to offer it to you. And I could say it's batal v'shishim, it's nullified in there. Come on, just take a sip. It's fine. It's just one drop of poison. So no one in their right mind would drink that water unless they had a death wish. So in a sense, what he's saying now, so what would be the okay? How would you be able to drink from that water when you put some antidote in there that then cleanses, so to speak, that poison? So it's not in there. In a sense, that's what he's telling us. And I think it's very important to understand the Baal Tanya's approach to what we call Gehenna. And he didn't discuss Gehenna Shal Sheleg and Gehenna Shal Esh. I'm not going to get back into that again. You can always look at the video from last week. But that the vision of what it means, Gehenna or hell in English, is not what you see portrayed in the movies or you read, that it's punitive, it's punishment. Even though he uses the word onesh, it makes it very clear in a few places that it's talking about a cleansing process in order to come before Hashem. Hashem is merciful. Hashem wants only the best for us, for his children. And therefore, going through the cleansing process is just to, so to speak, go have your shower before you come before the Melech Malchei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Some can just have a little sponge bath, and others need a little bit more incentive before they come before Hashem. So that's Parak Chet. chapter 8. Let's get started with Parak 9, Parak Tet, chapter 9. And we're going to discuss the two souls again, but we're going to talk about them in a more of a physical sense. Remember, we're talking physically. It doesn't really mean physical, but he's using it in a metaphorical sense. So let me get the text on the screen. Make it bigger. Okay. It says Vihine. Beginning of chapter 9. Shem Hashem Naseh v'Natzliach. V'hinei makom mishkan nefesh habahamit shemiklipat noga b'chol ish Yisrael. The location of our nefesh habahamit, which also, remember, is klipat, which comes from klipat noga. Again, anything that comes from klipat noga has the opportunity or the ability for us to elevate it. Let me just pause here for a second to remind everyone, because it's very important to understand the concept. We talked about, we made up percentages a long time ago. We said that maybe 5% of this world is gimel klipot tatmeot, things that are absolutely positively asur, prohibited. There's no way that they can become made into kadosh, into holiness. Food basar v'chalad that's cooked, it's gimel klipot tatmeot. That's 5% of the world. The other 5% of the world is kadosh, is kedusha, right? That's things like talis and tefillin and mezuzot and Shabbos lights and svarim and Torahs. Those things are the other 5%. The rest, the other 90%, is what's again known as klipat noga. It's up to you and me. If we're going to make it into something that is holy, or we're going to make it into something that is impure. Is it going to be elevated or is it not? And that all happens via the Nefesh HaBahamit. So he tells us, where is it physically located? Take a look here. He says, Hu belev b'chalal smali shehu malei dam. It's in the left space or chamber of the heart, which is filled with blood. Now, let's understand two things here. Number one, at that time period, the understanding of medicine at that time was that there were two chambers to the heart, not the four that we know of. At least, let me just leave it like that. But even though he's talking about the two chambers of the heart, it doesn't mean in a physical sense. Okay, we'll see why. Okay, so he says that where is the Nefesh HaBahamit? So if you were to have a spiritual, what's it called? When you take the body after they're dead and you, oh God, autopsy. If you have a spiritual autopsy, not you, God forbid, if a person has a spiritual autopsy after 120 years, they would open up, and then in the left chamber of the heart, which is filled with blood, we'll see what that means. You're going to find this person's nefesh habahamit. And it says, Ki hadam hu hanefesh. He's quoted this pasuk before. We know it says in the Torah that the dam, the blood, is a person's soul. You know that if a person, God forbid, has what's called exsanguination, has too much blood loss, person passes away. They can't survive unless they get a transfusion. So therefore, kol hata'avot hatifarot v'kas v'domehen. All of our lusts, all of our desire to be like big shots, all of our anger, all those similar character traits, hein belev, they are in the heart. Umealev hein mitpashtot b'chol haguf. They start off in the heart and they spread through the body. V'gam ole lamoach shebarosh. And then these feelings of anger, these feelings of lust, these feelings of gava, of pride, start to well up and boil up, so to speak, all the way up to the brain. That we think about them, we ruminate about them, we consider them, and we become smart with them. That doesn't mean to be smart. It means to use them in a way that we want to use them. Just like the blood source is in the heart, we know that the blood then starts in the heart and it goes throughout the whole body. He says so too, your nefesh habahamit starts all those desires, all those wishes, all those wants, all that ego. Remember, we talked about the nefesh habahamit is the ego, it's the I. All that begins in the heart and spreads through the body. And then, just like the blood, it also goes all the way up. Now, at this point, you might say to yourself, self. There's a very famous debate among philosophers. Does the head rule the heart or the heart rule the head? Well, at this point, if you were just to close the book, you would say, obvious, he holds the heart rules the mind. I've had this discussion over the years with a few people, intense discussions on this. And the answer is neither one is right, and they're both right. We're going to see why. So just hang in there. So first thing he tells us up from here, from this first line up to right here, is that our Nefesh HaBahamit, the Klipat Noga infused, so to speak, Nefesh HaBahamit, is in the left chamber of the heart, which is filled with blood, and all of those characteristics, all of the kaas, all the anger, all the ta'avot, all the lust, all the tifarot, the wanting to be better than somebody else, all that begins in the heart and spreads through the body. But Makom Mishkan Nefesh Elokit, where is the house, the housing, the location of our godly soul? Hu b'mochin sheberosh. It's in our brain. It's in our head. Umisham mitpasheshet lechol ha'avarim. And from there, our godly soul emanates, spreads throughout all of our limbs. V'gam belev v'chalal ha'yemani. It's also in the right chamber of the heart, she'en bo dam, that doesn't have any blood. Now, again, we're not talking in a physical sense, because if your right chamber, even though you have 4, doesn't have blood, you got some bigger problems than your Nefesh HaBahamit and Nefesh HaLokit. He's saying that picture your heart. You have the Nefesh HaBahamit starts in the left chamber of the heart, filled with blood. Your Nefesh HaLokit begins in the brain, spreads through the body, and terminates in the right chamber of the heart, which is empty. Left side starts Bahamit through the body up to the brain. The Elokit starts in the brain and mitpashet all the way, it spreads all the way to the left, to the right side of the heart that has no blood. Okay, very nice. It's very nice allegory, very nice little description. What exactly is going on here? Let's continue. U'komoshe katuv, as it says in the pasuk, lev chacham limino, that a wise person is in the right side, or the heart of the person who's wise is on the right. The avat Hashem kerishpe shalhevet mitlahevet belev maskilim hamevinim umitbonenim bedatam asher bemocham bidvarim hameorim et avat. It's a lot of words. As the latest catchphrase is word salad. I won't get into politics, but you know what I mean. If you don't, that's fine. What is it that takes place in the mochin, in the brain? What is it that takes place with the Nefesh Elokit? We talked about on the first part of this that the Nefesh HaBahamit, all the negative character traits, all those things start in the left side, filled with blood, spread through the body. Now he's saying, what is it that spreads? What is this Nefesh Elokit that spreads into the body and terminates in the right chamber of the heart? What is it? It's this Ahavat Hashem Kirishpeh Shalhevet. It is this extremely strong, burning love of Hashem that people who understand and know and are awakened to this love. This is going to be something we're going to talk about. This is the Havashal Rishpe Esh. We're going to talk in depth. Right now, just picturing, giving you he's giving us a roadmap. Right side, left side, heart, brain, which direction it's going, what emanates from what, and where does it terminate. That so far is just a roadmap. Furthermore, similarly, Simchat levav b'tiferet Hashem v'hadar geono. Now we said that a person on the one side may have ta'avot, lusts. The others also may have this desire to be the show off, and it's all about me. That starts with the Nefesh HaBahamit in the left chamber. The opposite is happening from the Nefesh Elokit starting in the brain, which is Simchat HaLev, the joy of the heart that wants specifically only everything for Hashem. And that Hashem is the most important thing. It's not exactly the words he's using. So I'm loosely translating right now. Kasher einei hachacham asher berosho b'moach chochmato ubinato mistaklim b'yikra demalka v'tiferet gedulato. As we look at the grandiosity with our intellect, at the grandiosity of Hashem, v'tiferet gedulato, and His most glorious of greatness. You can't really translate these words. Aden cheker, we can't even imagine, we can't even fathom the depth of His greatness. Ve'en sof, the infinity, meaning God, the tachlit, and the whole purpose of existence and creation. As explained elsewhere. V'chein shar midot kedushot shebalev hein michabad chachma bina and dat shebemochi. All these things, all the desires for Hashem, all our understanding, or at least our standing in awe of God, all of our feelings of love of Hashem, all these things, and the idea of chokhmah, binah, and dat, intellect, knowledge, and wisdom. These things, these are terms we've discussed before. We defined in depth before, and we're going to see again. All that starts off in the brain. Now, before we continue, let's understand a couple things. What did he just do for us? Besides paint a very nice metaphysical diagram of our neshama, our neshamot, the Nephesh Elokit and Nephesh Abahamit. What did he do for us? He told us that Klipat Noga, that which emanated from Klipat Noga, Nephesh Abahamit, is in one location and flows in one direction through the body. Starts at the heart and flows up to the brain. And our brain runs with it. That's the other part. Remember that. My heart may want something, desire something, but the tachlis, the actual action that I take, is because of my brain. My brain does. My body can't function without a brain. Well, I know a lot of people who do. That's a different story. But there is the brain goes with it. But we sometimes, and that's very common knowledge. But what's not as common for us to understand, at least it wasn't common knowledge to me, is that the love of God, you say, we say, you should love God. Right? What do we say? But what do we say? But we also say the word lavavacha, your heart. Wait a minute. How does that happen? We just said that the seat of the love of God is the brain, the being impressed, and I'm using that term very loosely, being impressed by God, and everything you want should be only because it's the right thing for Hashem. It's in the brain. So why don't we say we should love Hashem with all of our brain? I'm going to have to put that question off. You might be able to figure that one out, hopefully. But right now, I'm not going to get into that. Now, I told you before we started to read this chapter that what we will do tonight is to reach a milestone. And this is the milestone. This is considered, now I know that Tanya is 53 chapters. This point of chapter 9 is considered the unofficial end of the first part of Tanya. I'll explain to you why. Even though we're in the middle of the chapter. From this point forward, we have all the building blocks, information, and tools we will need to understand the rest of the book. Everything he needs to tell us, we now know the basic ideas, and the rest of the book will be using these pieces of information to build a tremendous. Now, what we basically did was we brought lahavdil, we brought all the building materials to the job site. We went out first. We had the contractor came and gave us a list of what's called my mind just went blank. Whatever, all the materials you need for the job. We went shopping. We bought all those materials. We brought them into our backyard to build whatever we're going to build. We brought it to the empty lot because we have an empty lot to build a building on. We now do not have to go and buy anything else. We have everything. Doesn't mean you have a building. Doesn't mean you can walk in and go in the elevator of that building or live in that house. All you have is the material. What we now have are all these building blocks for the rest of Tanya. And he will use them so that when we first started the book, and I told you, you're going to learn terms that you may already know, but they're going to have different definitions. For example, we still have yet to see his definition of tzaddik, benoni, and rasha. That we will, starting in the next chapter, chapter Yud. We'll start getting into that. Let me just, before I shoot my mouth, we'll take a quick look ahead. Yeah. We will start that journey in the next chapter, in chapter 10. We learned topics and concepts, klipat noga, gem klipotat meot, nefesh bahamit, nefesh elokit, all these things that we're learning about. There will be one more little twist we're going to learn in this chapter if we get to it tonight that'll add a little bit more to it. But for the most part, what we've done is we've gotten the building blocks. Now, if you're thinking, and remember the introduction to this chapter of Ginsburg talked about the milchama, the war that's going to take place between the nefesh bahamit and nefesh elokit. Which is we're going to talk about now, but let me dispel one thought that you might have as we enter this. If I were to tell you before you go into the next part of this chapter, how would you describe the supposed war between nefesh elokit and nefesh bahamit? Almost for sure, every one of you would say, easy. It's the Yetzer Hara versus the Yetzer Tov. It's my evil inclination versus my good inclination. But you'd be wrong. It sounds like it's almost the same thing what we're going to talk about, but there's a huge difference, and we'll have to go through this slowly and see how that's the case. But right now, what we want to do is I want to make sure that it's very clear that all he did in this beginning, this half of the first part of this chapter, was to lay a Google map, so to speak, in front of us. Nefesh bahamit, where it is. Nefesh elokit, where it is. Where it starts, where it terminates. Okay. Now what he's done is he's set up the battlefield. Let's take a look. Hine ktiv. You should know it says, next slide, make it bigger. Ula'om mila'om ye'ematz. Now, for those of you who are knowledgeable in Parshat Shavua and Chumash, you'll know that when Rivka, Imenu, was pregnant, it says that the babies were running around inside of her, and she said to herself, well, what's going on here? It's like something's wrong. But she went ahead and inquired of God. And what Hashem explains to her that she has inside of her doesn't tell it's Yaakov and Esav, but we know it's Yaakov and Esav. Says this has to do with the concept of a perpetual battle. What does this mean? Let's take a look at at this first top of your screen or in your book, the next line. Ki aguf nikra ir kitana. Our body is called a small city. Just like two kings might fight over one city. Each one wants to conquer it, and rule over it. That he wants the inhabitants to follow his rules. And basically, he wants to set up shop. He wants to be the one to run everything. Just like that's in a physical sense, where you have two kings battling over the same piece of land. He adds a new word here that we've only seen a couple of times before. I'll explain in a moment. So too, our two neshamas, our nefesh elokit, hachiyunit, our essential soul, habehamit, our animalistic soul, shemeha klipa, nilchamot zo imzo. They fight with each other. Al haguf v'chol avarav. They fight over the body and all of its limbs. How? What is the war? First, let's make sure we understand before we continue what he's saying. It says that, okay, he told us where the Nefesh Bahamit is, told us where the Nefesh Elokit is. Now he says, wait a minute. We also have to understand we're talking about a battlefield. Where is that battlefield? Right here. It's us. We're the battlefield of the Nefesh Bahamit and Nefesh Elokit. In what way? We're going to see in a minute. But it is a constant, perpetual battle that we're in. In what way? Now let's take a look here. I'll move this up so it's right at the top here. Starting with the word Sheha Eloki. What does each side want? Let's take a look at whether it's Russia and Ukraine, China and Taiwan, Israel and some fake people. Everyone is, maybe has a battle over real estate. So we know that our enemies would be more than happy to wipe us off the face of the earth. We know that Russia has a certain goal. They pretty much said they want to take over Ukraine. They want to occupy it. They want to depose the government and rule. It's exactly what he's talking about now. Zelensky on the one hand, Putin on the other hand, and they're fighting over one gigantic piece of real estate. I mean, I'm minimizing it. I'm sorry for the loss of life and everything else, but I need this just as my example. So we know what they're fighting about. And we have two leaders who each want their will to be done, so to speak. And it should be their rules, and the people should follow their schedule. So too it happens in our bodies. Take a look there. Sheha Elokit on the one side. What does our godly soul want? Its desire and its will is number one, she, meaning our Nephesh Elokit, wants to be the only ruler of the body. V'chol ha'avarim yusarim l'mashma'ata ubetelim etzla. And our physical body, our limbs, should be subservient or subjugated to it. That when I move my hand, the Nephesh Elokit wants, it's only to serve God. Legamre, completely. Notice that word, legamre, 100%. The Nephesh Elokit is not in this for part. The Nephesh Elokit is in it for the whole enchilada, as they say. Umerkava eleha. We're going to talk about this more later in the book, but we should be a chariot for the neshama. Just pause for 1 second. What does a chariot do? Chariot doesn't do anything by itself. The chariot has to have a rider, and then if the chariot then is moved but who is the driving force of that chariot? The driver. So he wants us to be the chariot for the neshama, the Nephesh Elokit. V'yu levush le'eser bechinoteha, and wants us to be the garments for the 10 characteristics, as it were, of the neshama Elokit, or Nephesh Elokit, v'gimel levusheha, and its 3 levushim, 3 garments. Hanal, that we've mentioned, haniskar le'el, haniskaru le'el, that are mentioned earlier, she'itlabshu kulam ba'avarei haguf, that our entire body should be enrobed by them. Meaning, again, that our entire body, this is what the Nephesh Elokit's goal is, that our entire body, every movement, every action we make, is guided specifically by the Nephesh Elokit in the idea of service of God. Kulam ba'avarei haguf, v'haguf kulo malei mehem levadam, that the whole body is filled with them, v'lo yavor zar b'tocham chas v'shalom, and no foreigner should get in. We're not talking about the southern border of the United States. Talking about nothing from the Nefesh HaBehamit should get in. Nothing of a sin, nothing of a machshava, dibur, or ma'aseh that's wrong should come in. Tahainu tlat mochin shebarosh yu memula'in mechabad, shebenefesh Elokit, shi chochmat Hashem, binato leitvonim b'gdulato, asher ein chekev ein sof leholid mehem. I'm going to read a little bit, couple, and I'll explain. Haydadat vayirah b'mocho. That again, this is using similar words he said before. The goal being that our neshama Elokit wants complete 100% subservience to Hashem, which begins in the brain. Upachad Hashem, and fear of God, belibo, that goes to the heart. The havat Hashem, and love of God, ke'esh bo'ara belibo, like a burning fire in his heart, kerishpei shal hevet, like a burning flame. Liot nichsefa v'gam kaltan nafsho b'chasheka v'chafetza ledovka bo be'ensof baruch hu b'chol lev v'nefesh. That we should want this. It's a deep, deep desire to be completed and connected to God. I have to finish this one thought before we end. Me'unka deliba, from the depths of one's heart. Shebechalal ha'yemani, from the right chamber of the heart. She'etocho ratzufa hava maleh v'gadush. It should be overflowing, this love of God, so it should overflow into the left chamber of the heart, which is where the Nephesh HaBehamit is. I'm not even going to translate that, because that's a topic by itself. It's kafia and itkasya. I'm going to deal with that next week, Bezrat Hashem. But the idea here to end with is, we talked about all the first half of the war, and that is starting in the brain. The Nephesh Elokit wants our body, literally life and limb, to be 100% subservient to God, that we should be overflowing with the love of Hashem, and to overcome the Nephesh HaBahamit in the left chamber of the heart. It's a big, tall order, big words. A lot to talk about still, Bezrat Hashem. We'll deal with next week, God willing. And in the meantime, I gave you, I think, a little bit of food for thought, hopefully some good kosher food, and wish you a good evening. And again, when there be changes over the next 3 or 4 weeks in the schedule, I will let you know, Bezrat Hashem, in advance.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Very welcome.
Bye.
You're welcome. Have a great evening, everybody.
By the way, you know,
Yeah.
the Ari's your site is, I think, tomorrow.
So yeah, right before you came on, we had mentioned that, and we dedicated to learn L'Ilui Nishmato. 36 years old. That's all he was. Unbelievable.
Amazing.